Hello and welcome to another episode of District of Sports. Reminder to find all of our sports coverage at the Washington Times at washingtontimes.com/sports. George Gerbo, Liam Griffin with you at a busy time, busy week, month, whatever you want to call it in DC and worldwide sports, Liam, but of course DC sports.
Yeah, no, we've got, we were just both watching the French Open. We had Commanders OTAs opening up, so football matters again. NBA, NHL playoffs, the World Cup is right around the corner too. Like it is, everything's kind of overlapping all at the same time, which is both fun for us as sports fans and occasionally horrific as people who this is also our job.
So many different things to keep up with. College football early schedule times were released this week as well. So for those folks, myself included, who make note of those and get your tailgate plans ready and all that type of stuff. Two quick thoughts. Francis Tiafoe moves on in the French Open. His quarter is busted wide open because he was in that Yannick Sinner quarter, and Sinner has now lost. So at Roland Garros, we will have a new men's champion for the first time in the Grand Slam since the 2023 U.S. Open. So more than 2 years ago, 2+ years ago. So there will be a change of the guard. Carlos Alcaraz not playing in that event. Tiafoe still alive. We'll see. He played well fourth round last year at Roland Garros, so we'll see how well that does. But also want to throw a thought out for DC native Haley Baptiste, who was having the best year of her career. She was seeded at a Grand Slam for the first time and had a pretty horrific looking injury to her left knee as she was jumping behind the baseline to play a shot. And we heard from Jim Courier, legendary American tennis player who's on TNT for the commentary coverage. He had talked with Baptiste's agent, and it appears it'll be at least 6 months with some knee ligament issues for Haley. And unfortunately, Liam, that means like it's the rest of the season basically, because Wimbledon's next month. She of course loved playing. We'll probably still see her around at the Mubadala City DC Open in late July, but the tennis season basically runs through September, October, and for 6 months plus, we likely won't see her back until Australia next year. So that's kind of a crushing blow for someone, local talent, who had been steadily building her way and doing it through the grind, and finally got to a level of kind of respect among fellow players on the tour, and to get a seed at a Grand Slam here at RG, and unfortunately a big setback in this tournament now, and that she'll have to get on the rehab trail to get back healthy for next year.
Yeah, and I think it's something that it's easy for us as sports fans to kind of compartmentalize and say, oh man, sucks that happened and it was a bad looking injury, and then we move on and there's other stories and there's other players to watch. But from our roles, when you talk to people, especially after they come back from injury, it's one of the most interesting things I get to do. Was the post-game interview I remember most from last NFL season was talking to Javon Kinlaw after Jaden Daniels dislocated his elbow. Because Javon Kinlaw's a big dude and he can be a little bit intimidating in the locker room. He has no filter and he'll let you know exactly what's on his mind. And it was a rough game, a blowout. But I went over and talked to him and I was like, so what are you feeling? Just goes like, it sucks. And there's nothing that you can tell an athlete in a time like this that makes it suck any less, that makes them feel any less alone, that makes them confident that they're going to be able to come back the same, because we have all these advancements. And so things like ACLs and Achilles and all these things aren't career enders the way they used to be. But those rehab stints are just crushing. And I can only imagine that it's even worse from an individual sport. At least when you're in an NFL locker room, you're still in the building, you're in the facility, you're not totally on your own. But for something like a tennis pro, where those careers can also be so fleeting in a way too, at least when you're trying to get to the top of your game, it can be a really isolating experience. So we'll be hoping the best for her, hoping to see her back on the court soon. But it is definitely something that can be taken for granted in that injury recovery timeline.
100%. From one global sport in tennis to another in soccer, World Cup final preparations, as it's like, still part of me hard to believe. I know I see it everywhere. I was telling a friend yesterday that I went to the grocery store and nearly every type of product has either an America 250 logo or a World Cup logo on it. Pringles, Chobani, all the, just things you would like. I had to do a double take and it was Lionel Messi on a can of Pringles. And I'm like, okay. But the World Cup is here. It is in North America, across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The U.S. hosting the bulk of those matches, and also the semis and the final. Your story this week was a great one because I think, Liam, that Americans love a good chance for a sporting event, right? And DC, one of these cities that tunes in and gets game for the World Cup every time just because of how multicultural and international of a place it is and how many different fan and rooting interests you have. Of course, as we talked about a few episodes ago, no games this year, this World Cup cycle in DC, just because of the lack of the infrastructure. In theory, if it comes back at some point in 20 years or less, the new Commander Stadium at RFK will likely be a better venue than FedEx Field or Northwest Stadium is. So no games, but we'll start with this fan activation on the mall that you wrote about. So they're trying their best to kind of integrate. The mall is going to be such a busy space from now and pretty much through August and September. There's the UFC fight is nearby at the White House, the America Fair with a bunch of acts and different things like that. Obviously, the normal July 4th fireworks celebration, which would be bigger than any fireworks celebration held on the mall previously. And the mall's had a lot of big fireworks celebrations over the years. And now a World Cup that kind of runs concurrently with the America 250 celebrations almost. What is that going to be like? Will people be able tune into the games, hang out, put up a picnic on the mall? What type of involvement will DC fans be able to have if they head down to the mall to this festival?
Yeah, that's the exact kind of vibe that they're trying to bring to this is, all right, so DC's not going to have a game, but they want to, embrace the monuments and the iconography of the district as much as possible. And as you mentioned, a lot of sports fans here, the city is going to be buzzing. Like there might be a time in the middle of, early July, late June, where it's like 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. You're like, wow, those bars are really busy because people are getting ready because this is not a every summer event. And obviously it being in North America is huge. But it is going to be a place where people will be just about every day. So every day there's a match, which, throughout the group stages, I think the first day without a match is July 8th. So for about a month straight, there's going to be a live watch party on the National Mall. I mean, the fan engagement stuff is really going to be what you make of it. So if you want to come and set up a picnic, you'll be able to do that. There's going to be, I wouldn't be surprised if there's things like face painting. It's going to be a really family friendly kind of, atmosphere, but it is definitely just kind of a live watch party where there are going to be tons and tons and thousands of people. So it's seemingly geared at, if you don't know where else to watch the game, if you're, looking to support a nation that maybe doesn't have a dedicated bar in the city, where lots of those are going to turn into, my mom's English, and so I will be going to watch every England game live. And so if you don't have an English bar, if you're looking for somewhere else, there's going to be your people. It's kind of what they're approaching that as, to kind of build community, because that is what they're looking to pitch this World Cup as. And I touched a little bit about that in the story that's going to go live in Friday's paper, most likely, about Iran's World Cup experience and their efforts to get over here and play matches without security concerns, is that they're trying to paint this World Cup as a peacemaking opportunity. If not long-term, then at least we can all sit down and enjoy World Cup matches. We can all watch the beautiful game together. That's what they're gearing this as. So it'll be interesting. You mentioned the sheer number of events that are happening throughout the district, and especially on the National Mall. The day-to-day turnout is something that I'll be casually keeping an eye on. I'm sure that the U.S. matches will be very well attended there. And I wouldn't be surprised if FIFA or Fox Sports has cameras set up to watch that throughout the tournament. But it'll be lively. I'll give it that. What the exact intention of FIFA there or Freedom 250, which is the conglomeration of officials that are putting together a lot of these events. It's going to be free. It's going to be open to the public. It's the National Mall. It's kind of what we come to expect from things like this. But it will be interesting to see what that crowd looks like on a day-to-day basis, even just from a demographics basis. I think it'll be fun. It'll feel like the city. It's not something they're going to have in just about anywhere else in the country. So it'll be an interesting way to catch the tournament.
And it may be the best bet for fans to catch the tournament, as you start to see the sticker shock followed by the backlash, followed by maybe a reduced sticker shock in actually getting to some of these games. If you were in the DMV and you're trying to go, let's say, to Philadelphia or to the Meadowlands, to MetLife Stadium, or World Cup stadium. We'll get to that in a minute. Another one of your stories about getting to these games, and the FIFA, of course, controlling the tournament and sets the prices on these. They are higher than most people expected, higher than if you were to go in recent years to, France or even Qatar, where World Cups have been held in recent years, to see games abroad. And add into that, so that's FIFA's part of it, but then we've got places like New York, for example, and the MTA and the Transit Authority, Long Island Railroad, jacking up prices for a train that would be normally in the $15 to $20 range for a round trip, to now we're going to make it $100 a ticket. And we've seen this backfire with these other major events. And I was at the NFL draft in Pittsburgh, and there's a casino that's essentially adjacent, a block and a half away from Acrisure Stadium in Pittsburgh, where the draft was. And the casino was charging $500 to park in their garage for the 3-day weekend. The garage is normally free, and occasionally they charge like $50 during a Steelers game or $100 during a Steelers game. And then after nobody showed up at the garage, they're like, okay, mea culpa, and the price went down to $100 for the remaining days of the draft. And so I trying to understand some of these city planners, and it's been in a couple of your stories that you've filed, Liam, about just how they're not seeing the demand in terms of things like hotels and things like people buying parking and all that other type of stuff in advance. When it comes to these big events, I'm kind of a late, I'm looking for the best deal. And we're in a time when the economy is, terrible for a lot of people. It's good in some ways. It's terrible in a lot of ways. And you're trying to figure out the best deal that can be had. And it might behoove you to hang around and wait and see if these prices have dropped. And now we're starting to see in some of the official tickets that, okay, they're trying to, they see that they've overreached in where they set the market, expecting Americans to pay this money, and perhaps just a lot of international fans who are crazy about their teams and travel all over. I'm thinking about the folks from the Netherlands, the folks from England, obviously, Germany, and other European countries, Argentina, Brazil, especially for those matches in the southern part of that are going to be in the southern part of the U.S. And they've maybe have overplayed their hand here a little bit in finding that sweet spot between, we can charge this and they're going to make money, right? But like still making it accessible while also making it a fair value and not too cheap of a ticket. But now you're stuck in this, we might see some, and I'm curious, in some of these opening round matches with teams that people may not be familiar with, that you're going to see some chunks of empty seats in places, especially in lower levels that are visible because FIFA has priced people out of these seats.
Yeah, and I will say to start that this is not an exclusively FIFA or even a sports problem. Like the ticket industry is going through a tough time right now after being much maligned. Ticketmaster in particular has been maligned in recent years for what some people have called a monopoly. But we are seeing acts, musical acts. I mean, even maybe aren't at the top of their game, but musicians that are canceling parts of their tours, sometimes outright, because they're just not selling tickets the way they used to because of the way that the ticketing system is functioning now. So I will say this is not exclusively a FIFA problem, but you would hope that being arguably one of, if not the biggest sporting event in the world, I think they have 108 matches throughout this year. They're expecting 5 million visitors. Their revenue projections are $13 billion. Like, you would think that you would have many people around the clock working to find that exact pinpoint. And they have not found it so far. And I don't see a reality where, 2 days before Iran and Egypt in Seattle, those tickets dropped to $20. I was looking at them right now for the story I was working on today. They're still running for Iran, Egypt, in Seattle, $300 for the cheapest, get you in the door and go sit in the nosebleed price. And that's just not tenable for anybody. And so you are seeing people have to reckon with the reality of their financial situations and what they are willing to pay. So there's $32,000 seats for the final. Those will probably get sold. People want to be there for a monumental event like that. And we see it with the Super Bowl too, where, fans of individual teams aren't going to be there. It's a bucket list item for people. Either the ultra wealthy or people with that much disposable income are going to come in, or people will, if they are that passionate, sacrifice some of their savings for that. But you alluded to it, those group stage matches, And especially with the expanded tournament this year, where you have an increased quantity of matches throughout North America, you're not going to be able to sell all those tickets because they haven't sold all those tickets yet. A lot of them are on the resale market now, and you're going to see those ebb and flow throughout the next month or so. And it's an impossible task for anybody to try to guess the whims of, the American economy where it is right now, or the whims of sports fans. But there's just been a few instances where FIFA, in approaching an American World Cup, has just really missed the mark. For example, when you look at the way they've approached tailgating, which is that haven't. Yeah. So, but these stadiums are not set up for public transit for the most part. So you have all these parking spaces and parking lots around like MetLife Stadium that are not going to be used because they want to have increased security, and because they're assuming that the European culture of viewing games is going to follow to the US. That's not how it works, because in Europe, for example, obviously it's countries from all over the world, but in Europe, which has such a diehard following of the sport, you have pub crawls that lead to the stadium. Around MetLife Stadium, there are highways.
Parking lots, highways.
And it's the same thing when you look at Kansas City at I was going to say Arrowhead because it's Arrowhead, but Kansas City Stadium, it is notorious for being in a inaccessible place that I think is served by a single bus line, and there's going to be limited parking spaces, but at the same time, there's not going to be a limit on the number of seats sold. So you have 60, 70, 80,000 people who are going to be going to games who are using 10,000 parking spaces plus, really less than ideal public transport. And then we move back to New York and New Jersey, where there's an 11-fold increase on the train out to MetLife Stadium. And they have moved that down a bit now. It was $150. Now it's down to $105, but that's still $105 per person. So
wait another week and see if it drops by 25 more.
Right. And it's just, if you're trying, all right, it's our once in a lifetime trip. I'm going to take my two kids to see the World Cup. All right. So that's $100 for you, $200 for both of them. And, and the $300 per person a ticket, this is now a mortgage payment for this one event. And so I'm very, very fascinated by how well FIFA is going to be able to adapt to these things. The group stage matches are on the field they're going to be a World Cup. That's pretty indisputable. But the way that FIFA is able to approach and handle these things off the field as they develop, because it's become kind of a meme on like sports Twitter. There's going to be some poor Dutch family that thinks they're going to be able to walk to some of these stadiums from where they're staying in downtown, and they're going to be walking across like 8-lane highways, and it's going to be a nightmare. It's either going to be the best day of their lives or the worst, and we're only hoping for the best. But it's just so strange, the way that everything is set up. And so the numbers that FIFA put out is about 5 million total spectators, and about 1 million of those are going to be international visitors to the U.S. So hopefully some people figure it out, but it's really going to depend on how well they're able to adapt and how loud soccer fans are going to get about some of these things, which, as you and I are both well aware, they'll get loud.
They can, yeah, very much so. The FIFA ban on, and rude move by FIFA coming in and taking over the parking, which normally, if you're aware, DC is kind of different because, besides Northwest, our arenas and things like that, everything's kind of close in there, and there's not just surface lots everywhere, which is the nice part about living in DC. But generally, like, you've got these parking conglomerates in major cities across the country, that control the parking. And so FIFA comes in, FIFA's running all the parking. In Philadelphia, they have pushed back and said, hell or high water, we're going to tailgate. And so, but still the price to get in for the pass for the lot is minimum $125, goes up to $650. That's far more than any Eagles game that anyone would go to, in the coming season. And it's going to be interesting to see, like you say. I'm curious if there's kind of like, not stumbles per se, but just like, oh, here's some snafus in a couple of early games, and then there are some unilateral decisions made from the top that say, okay, we're going to fix this policy, and it's going to go into effect for sites around the continent, basically.
Yeah, and so I wonder what it will take. Like, is there going to be a game that kicks off and it's just half the seats are unfilled because there's people still trying to trickle into the stadium? Like, I'm wondering what it's going to take. And you mentioned Philadelphia in particular, which I will not say anything detrimental to the city of Philadelphia. I will be there week 1 of the NFL season. But it is pretty notorious for the traffic in that area to become pretty nightmarish anywhere for like 3 hours before a game starts. And so it'll be fascinating. And the other thing is that it is the World Cup and the world does kind of revolve around it. But American cities are still going to be, there's still going to be rush hour traffic that are going to be competing with stadium traffic. That is not the American norm. And so, yeah, it'll be one of the kind of underrated storylines to watch is that fan experience angle, because years of these concerns and frustrations about ticket prices and parking and public transit are all kind of coming to a head on the biggest stage possible.
And speaking of the fan experience, if you are someone who is headed to one of these games across North America, especially on the U.S. side, you'll see a good number of changes that you would not normally see in these stadiums, as you've written about, Liam. Cosmetically from the outside, these corporate branding that you come to know and maybe not love, but know and become familiar with on the outside of some stadiums will be covered up. It was fun watching video I saw of people on rigged up and rappelling down the side of Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, of course, home to the Falcons and the Atlanta United MLS club, and them scaling down there and covering up the big Mercedes-Benz logo with the tarp with the FIFA logo on it. But specifically the on the field thing here, and this is kind of where it can dovetail a little bit with what you do, what you cover in the NFL. These grass surfaces, the norm in Europe for playing soccer on. It's kind of, we've gotten used to people in America from the high school level on up playing on artificial surfaces all over the country, and that's just not the norm. As if you're in the lower levels of the sport and working your way up pretty much around the globe, of course in Europe, which is kind of the heartbeat of soccer. And so you've got these very elaborate, as you wrote about this week, these very elaborate looking elevated tray table things being built, and then we lay down the base layer of sand and gravel and everything else to stabilize it, and then we're putting the grass surface on top of it and hoping that the watering and the mowing and whatever care that needs to be tended to a grass surface on top of an artificial surface can last for the fortnight plus that it needs to last, give or take some of these places. That's interesting, and I'm curious to start on with the grass. Will it be enough? As we've talked about in the NFL, players believe grass, and there's studies to this end, grass is a safer surface. They love to play on grass. Of course, the sport was played on grass for the entirety of its existence until the Astrodome came along. Then we had AstroTurf and et cetera, et cetera. Now we've got hybrid surfaces and everything else. So the artificial product is better than it's ever been, but at the same time, it's still an artificial product, right? And some players NFL players don't like playing on it. And of course, most soccer players do not like playing on it. So it'll be interesting to watch soccer players in NFL stadiums that have turf normally for an artificial turf for NFL games playing on grass. It's not the case at Northwest Stadium. It's not the case at a place like Miami, which Miami Gardens at Hard Rock, where that's an outdoor, you can grow grass year round in Miami, unlike a place, let's say like Philadelphia, where there's crazy weather. So I'm interested in your thoughts on the juxtaposition of seeing grass surfaces in these NFL stadiums and whether that's something that may give this nascent movement among some players in the players organization to get grass back on some of these NFL fields and stadiums around the country.
Yeah, I would say that it's not nascent to the players. They are very adamant about it, especially players who, obviously I cover a lot of the NFC East, which has some very controversial field playing surfaces and stadiums. When you look at the surface in Northwest Stadium is less than ideal if you ask the players. MetLife is constantly ranked as the worst. And then out in Dallas, where the playing surface is okay, but there are concerns about the sunlight coming in. And so the NFL players are not going to raise an enormous stink about this until their next collective bargaining session, which is not for a few years. But it has already started to kind of percolate where players are asking, if you can do this for them, if it's worth it for, 8 games in the summer, why isn't it worth it for us to have for our, 8, 9, 10 home games during the NFL season? Because the expense that's going into these stadiums, especially ones that did not already have that grass surface. So Miami, as you mentioned, they laid down some new sod. They just finished it today and posted a hype video about it because that's the age of social media that we live in. But AT&T Stadium in Dallas in particular, because they gave us numbers on it, it's something like $40 million. They've installed state-of-the-art grow lights that are going to be purple and hanging from that giant Jerry World Jumbotron 24/7 because you can't get light otherwise in there. And CD Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys asked Jerry Jones on social media, kind of put him like, they just saying like, please just keep it, please. We just want to keep, please. We just
keep it until at least die. Keep it until it dies, and then
right. You've already got the stuff set up. You've already ordered it from Colorado in Dallas's case, and SoFi Stadium in Southern California got theirs from Washington State. Phillies is coming from New Jersey, I believe. You're getting all this grass that is specially grown, and they're installing new, water irrigation systems and installing the grow lights and doing all this work. And it's an enormous investment. And so for NFL players, they're asking why the investment doesn't align with them, because none of these FIFA World Cup sites are going to be hosting as many, World Cup games this year as they will NFL games. Like if you include the preseason and potential postseason, all that, it just won't. I think MetLife leads the way with 8, and MetLife in particular is going to host, 17, 18 NFL games this year. It's just not what the NFL owners want to do, though, because it is so expensive. They did not have enough bargaining chips in the discussions with FIFA. FIFA drew a hard line in the sand and say, if you want the players to come, they're not going to come if you have the surfaces that you have now, because of how negatively athletes around the world view these playing surfaces. And so that's another thing that I'm going to be watching pretty closely as someone who's been to a lot of these stadiums, is not all that grass is going to be created equal. Mm-hmm. Not all of it is going to be maintained equally. Some of it is going to wear much quicker than others. And my favorite novelty is that even the ways that they're displayed within a stadium is going to be different. So Kansas City had to take out part of its lower bowl. They removed tons and tons and tons of concrete, and the playing surface itself is going to be off-centered. Mm-hmm. And it's all that investment for what players say is compared to what they do, a short-term thing. And so it is going to be it's another storyline to watch for, I guess I was going to say off the field, but it is literally the field, is that, not all these playing surfaces are created equally. They're all using, a lot of them are overlapping in the developers that they're using and the contractors that they're working with. But somewhere like Kansas City is a soccer mecca in the United States. They are very proud of that. Atlanta is the home of Atlanta United. They built that stadium with soccer in mind, same with Miami. But when you start getting up to MetLife and to Philadelphia and down over to SoFi on the West Coast, it's very curious how well those things are going to play out. And they're going to be stress tested quickly. And soccer fans, again, I can't bring it up enough, but they will let people know if there's any concerns. All it takes is for one player to have an injury that might have happened on another playing surface anyway. But if it happens on one of these new playing surfaces that maybe don't hold up well in weather or elements, it's going to become a talking point very quickly.
The seams too, how well when you're laying sod's pretty if it's just in your yard, right? And you're kind of, you do your best to water where the edges of the pieces of sod meet. It's different when it's receiving a whole bunch of torque and traction from soccer cleats and people running back and forth on it, on top of this, table, lack of a better term, of sand and gravel and soil underneath of it, because you can't just lay grass down over top of fake grass. It's got to have a base. It's got to have something to it. And so that's going to be interesting to see if you can do it in Green Bay. Granted, that's probably the gold standard for growing grass in harsh conditions. They've got the whole, it looks like a big greenhouse when they drag the lights out there, and they've got kind of a dome tent thing that covers over the field during periods of inclement weather and everything like that during the winter to keep Lambeau Field's grass in good shape. So it'll be interesting to see how these stadiums react. And then kind of like, as you were talking about removing concrete, and you wrote even like a place like Miami, which is outfitted for these big games and has hosted, major CONCACAF, things like that in past years. It'll be interesting to see, if you're a soccer fan, the traditional walk out and the ball's on the podium and the ref grabs the ball and the kids come out with the teams and everything like that. And where's that usually occur? Midfield, right? And we don't have midfield locker rooms at most of these football stadiums in America. They're in corners, or they're behind our end zones for NFL games. So it'll be interesting to see how they proceed to do that when there's not kind of a unified way for these teams to walk out of a solitary area, like if you were seeing a game at Old Trafford or one of these great stadiums in Europe, where the teams come out at the midfield. In America, there's a few that come to mind. I know Acrisure Stadium in Pittsburgh has some midfield entrances and exits, but generally that's not how American football stadiums are designed, right? So there's going to be, it's the World Cup, but there's kind of going to be some of these little tweaks that maybe if you're a devoted soccer fan, you're going to have to get used to in watching these games in the States and in North America.
Yeah, I was thinking that this is going to, especially to people who are not American, this World Cup is going to feel very American in the presentation of it, not just the stadiums, but even in the television presentation is going to be very different from the number of commercial breaks, for example, that European soccer fans are used to, because they're going to have more. An increased number of hydration breaks. I will point out, I'm very glad you brought up Green Bay, because Green Bay is kind of the pinnacle of what that natural playing surface could be. And it is also an exception that proves the rule, because Green Bay is only is only going to operate like that because of its one of a kind in the U.S. ownership system, where, Green Bay's ownership group does not care about hosting concerts in the summer, whereas Jerry Jones will host as many events as possible to
boxing, wrestling,
the Final Fours. The concerts are in particular are the reason that a lot of the owners give. So the cost of upkeep is their number one reason to use those artificial playing surfaces. It's easier than having groundskeepers and all those things that we mentioned. But also I can have a concert in here on Friday night and still host an NFL game on Sunday without having to completely overhaul everything. So I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, the nature of an American World Cup is going to be, again, we're going to have all these little things. They're going to be like, that's just a little off. Like, I'm watching soccer and the game itself is the same, but this is undeniably American in its presentation. And that's why I think it's interesting the way they've had to cover up or remove, with cranes at some of these stadiums, the endorsements and paid sponsorship deals, because you can only do so much to take sponsorship out of American sports. It is an American ideal, like, baseball and apple pie.
You'll have sponsors. They just won't be, they'll be FIFA sponsors and Coca-Cola and everything. They're just not going to be the ones, the local sponsors. Because FIFA did, if you're saying who won a negotiation, it really did seem like FIFA got everything they wanted to have out of the American host cities. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Games start June 11th. We'll have Liam, of course, will have more in the lead up to it, as we get closer and closer amid a busy summer here on the East Coast, as well as all across the country, where it comes to sports. More specifically, locally, it's a busier summer than perhaps anticipated for the city's NBA franchise, the Washington Wizards, who somehow, Liam, and it was like, I wasn't even watching the draft lottery when it happened. It just like, because I was conditioned last year in the Cooper Flag draft, and the NBA system, which is what the NHL uses, the two leagues that have the lottery function now, where you've got a certain sequence of numbers, and if those numbers come up out of the lottery bingo ball hopper looking machine they got that forces air up and shoots the ball up, if you've got X, that combination of numbers, then you win the top pick. And the Wizards were one number away from winning the top pick last year, which would have been the Cooper Flag draft. And then they go out and do a whole bunch of movement in terms of bringing in trades and bringing in players. We talked about Trae Young. We talked about Anthony Davis a few weeks ago, and we'll talk about them more as the season gets closer later this summer. And unexpectedly, and it shouldn't have been unexpectedly, because here comes back John Wall, 2010, and he's there representing the Wizards. He had been away, kind of essentially, quiet retirement, basically, from the game from the last time we saw him a few years ago. And now he starts popping back up. He's going to be advising and helping at Howard University in the district with their basketball program. And then, hey, John Wall's going to go to the NBA draft. Oh, that's interesting. Symmetry. Boom. Wizards number 1 draft pick. And it doesn't like make any actual sense, because the team people keep telling me, oh, they were tanking. I'm like, no, last year they were definitely tanking. This year it was like they felt like they were trying to win some games this year, at least the way I thought I was watching the games. And so I was prepared for them to have like a top 5 pick or somewhere in the top 10. And here we are, the Wizards, the number 1 pick for the first time since that John Wall draft in 2010. And just big picture, Liam, the meaning of it, obviously the symbolism of John being there, but 2010 is when I first moved to the district, and seeing how that kind of turned people back to basketball in the region. I'll always say that the Commanders are number 1 and people love football, right? I think DC can be the best basketball market in the country, between the level of stuff that goes on at all of these high schools all around the DMV and the Catholic League and in Maryland and Virginia, the stuff that has gone on historically at the colleges, whether it's Mason, whether it's Georgetown, whether it's UMD. If you want to throw UVA in, that's farther out. But the area's got such a rich basketball tradition, and it can and should be the best basketball market in the country. And the flagship thing leading that should be your professional team that you have in the city, right? And historically, it has been that, but it wasn't for a long time. And then here came Wall and turned the franchise's fortunes around and gave them a real shot in so many of those playoff runs to the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs, and they kind of hit the ceiling and ran into some better teams there. But John Wall and that number 1 pick and the moments that it eventually foretold and created, I think, is something that Wizard fans have kind of maybe woken up here and realized that, can we do this again now, as this front office, which feels a decade into whatever you want to call this, rebuild, blow it up, start over, it now feels that there's actually not only momentum, but that it's pointing in a direction. Because a lot of times it's been like we're moving the pieces around, still don't know where it's going. Now it actually feels like there can be a direction when you've got the top pick in this year's NBA draft.
Yeah, for years there has been a lack of hope, because there is no point, or at least it felt like for the past 5-6 years, it felt like there is no point to be a Wizards fan on a day-to-day basis. You can come back later when the team is good, or at the very least interesting. And for years they've been, you can get yourself excited about, Alex Sarr, the number 2 pick, or, Bub Carrington's got so much feist and energy to him, and it's a great watch. But for people who are more casual basketball fans, where it's not their number 1 sport, It was just so easy to get the alert on your phone and say, the Wizards lost by 47 points, and to put your phone back down and to continue going about your life, because that team would bring you nothing but sorrow. And so it felt like, for the first time, probably since 2017, 2018, that there was, I was like, oh, there's Wizards fans on my timeline. Like, they're all here and they're happy and they're experiencing emotion, because that's just the thing about the Wizards, is that you couldn't even be disappointed, because at that point, fool me 8 years in a row, shame on you. Like, you can't keep summing yourself up like that. And so to immediately have this influx of energy and hope, and it's not just the lottery, it's the fact that there appear to be adults in the building now who are running that organization, who have a vision for that team, and who are approaching executive moves and franchise building moves with a long-term view towards winning, and not just, treading water on a year-to-year basis. And that looked bad for the past couple years. But this season, it wasn't great in the wins and losses, obviously. But the ways they started to build, where they're like, oh, they're trading they're not just trading away pieces. We expect guys like CJ McCollum to come in and have their cup of coffee and get shipped out for a pick and a prospect. But it's like, oh, they're bringing in Anthony Davis, and they're bringing in, oh, Trae Young's interesting. He's not even aging. He should be ostensibly like close to his basketball prime. And then you hear the next thing where they're saying, oh, those guys might stick around. You know, like they might sign here. They might sign a deal. You know, Trae Young maybe a little bit more likely than Anthony Davis. And then you pair all of that, like people dipping their toe in the water, be like, okay, maybe the Wizards got something going on. And then they land a number 1 pick, and it just rejuvenates everything that this city had kind of been putting off for years. And not only that, it's a good draft to have a top pick. You know, we'll get more into those prospects over the next month or so, but that is not a given every year of an NBA draft. And it's not just a one-player draft. It's not a Wembanyama or a Cooper Flag draft where it is 1A and a large gap and a bunch of other players. And it's not a 2024 draft where you have, who knows, at number 1, it ended up being Zachary Risachet to the Atlanta Hawks right before Alex Sarr. But there's a handful of prospects there that the Wizards could land. And if you're a Wizards fan, you can start talking yourself into not just like, you know, better than the worst team in the league, but you can start talking yourself into a play-in berth. You can start talking yourself into the unheralded heights of 500 basketball, which is it's a joke, but it's true.
That's the threshold. Yeah.
There is a generation of young fans who grew up and became basketball fans in the district, not because of guys like John Wall or Gilbert Arenas, but they've had to look elsewhere. They've had to become fans of LaMelo Ball or Steph Curry or, you know, Kevin Durant, because there hasn't been that kind of nucleus or engine for basketball fandom in the city. And now there is a reason to take your child to a Washington Wizards game. I mean, almost immediately, where there's going to be, on a night-to-night basis, a team that is trying to win, a team that is built to compete. And it's just such a change from where they were. And it's not an overnight thing. It's not just the pick, but the pick goes such a long way to waking everybody up to the possibilities.
3 quick thoughts as we close on it. To the point about interest, story in The Athletic this week that cites Monumental Sports and Entertainment officials, of course, Ted Leonsis' group that owns the Wizards and the Caps. 95% of season ticket holders renewed, Wizards season ticket holders renewed, and new season ticket sales 3 times greater than they were at this same point last year. So there's demonstrated interest via fans putting their money where their emotions are in that phase. And it'll be interesting to see, we'll get, as we get closer to the draft, which is at the end of June, about AJ DeBonsa, talented BYU player. Many people think he is the overall, should be the consensus number 1 pick. Utah's number 2 right behind Washington. He played his college career at BYU. Would the Jazz take a move to move up? If it's not DeBonsa, then there's Cameron Boozer, who ironically played his final college game at Capital One Arena in a buzzer-beating loss to Connecticut in the Elite Eight just a few months ago. So many good storylines that are going to develop out of this draft, Liam.
Yeah, and Darren Peterson is another one who had a kind of up and down college career with some, you know, what he has called like really serious complications from cramps as well, as a potential number 2 pick. And there's going to be that circling interest. AJ DeBonsa has been tied to the Utah Jazz and to owner Ryan Smith for a few years now, and it seems like everything in his career has led him to Utah. And I don't know that the Wizards are going to let that happen, because the Jazz might be willing to make a trade to number 1. And we've talked about the Wizards front office being a kind of shrewd and analytically minded and forward-thinking organization. But we just spent 10 minutes talking about what the number 1 pick does to the city and how that reawakens the fan base. And so even if you get that guy at number 2, the energy in Capital One Arena on that first night this fall when they open the season, or whenever that ends up being, of if you're able to put on the floor, you know, your number 1 pick, introduce him for the first time, you're able to pair him with Trae Young and pair him with Anthony Davis, who's a defensive player of the year caliber player in the past. It looks, and that's not even counting every other player that they've acquired in this foundation laying period,
plus,
as they've acquired draft picks and young players and given them time to develop and thrown them kind of out to the wolves and say, you're going to learn how to be an NBA player because we are not going to bring in anybody else. No one is coming to save you. You guys are going to steer this ship. And they've been able to find success in some ways and they've struggled in others. But it makes that next season so interesting to come into it with hope and energy. And it's been years since I've been like, I'm excited to see what the energy is like at Capital One for a Wizards game. When the Mystics get up in there and a couple times every summer and when the Caps are there, it can be absolutely electric. And it has not been that way for Wizards games, except for when the Lakers are in town, and it's not because of the Wizards fans. And so I think that the broader cultural impact and boost of that number one pick is going to be worth more than whatever package you could grab from Utah in a swap.
Wizards' future is now. They've been saying it for a lot of years. It is actually now. We'll see the moves they make here in the coming weeks ahead of the draft to get themselves in position to perhaps finally capitalize on what feels like a near decade, has been a near decade of trying to rebuild professional basketball in Washington with a direction now for the first time in such a long time. And we'll keep tabs on it, of course, for you at WashingtonTimes.com/sports, where you can find all of our sports coverage. Check out District of Sports wherever you get your podcasts. Search District of Sports in your favorite podcast app, including Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, and more. Find Liam at by Liam Griffin on social media. Find myself at Gerbo3 on socials and at Wash Time Sports for all of our sports coverage on socials. Liam, I appreciate the time as always.
Of course, it's a blast. It's an exciting time, and I'm glad I get to kind of break it all down with you. It's an absolute delight.
It's fun. We'll have more for you in the coming weeks. For Liam, I'm George. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.